everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Every Wednesday, photographers from all over the country meet here to connect, inspire, and create. Our guest speakers share images, photography tips, and their stories of inspiration that help you improve your own photography skills. The schedule for upcoming presentations is on my website at lindanickell.com, as well as the links to previous sessions on YouTube. Tonight's guest is Tim Gray. Tim has authored 18 books on a variety of photography-related subjects. He's produced over 200 video training courses, and his articles have appeared in respected publications such as Digital Photo Pro and Outdoor Photographer, among many others. Tim's YouTube channel, Tim Gray TV, is filled with helpful and informative videos to help you learn new techniques to get the most out of Lightroom, as well as other photography-related topics. You can connect with Tim through his website at timgrayphoto.com, and you can also sign up for his newsletter. In tonight's presentation, Optimizing with Maximum Control in Lightroom Classic, Tim is going to share techniques and inspiration to help you master the use of masking and targeted adjustments in Lightroom Classic. Welcome to the Happiness Hour, Tim.
Thank you very much, Linda. It's great to be here.
Yay! So I told you earlier, for most of you guys, I just met Tim tonight. He was, his name popped up in conversation, and my friend Valerie, who's in this room, said, "You should get Tim Gray." And I'm like, all right, I'm not afraid. So I sent him a note, fully expecting him to say, no, or worse, just not reply. And he immediately said, this sounds great. Sign me up. So here you are. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing what you know. And from what I understand, and based on the videos I've seen, you know a whole lot. So I'm super excited to have you here.
Well, you had me at happiness.
Oh, right. Or you thought, oh, it's drinks, because a lot of people assume that,
happy hour.
It was supposed to, we started calling it the happy hour, and then I'm like, that sounds like drinking. And then someone said happiness hour, and then it kind of stuck. And I didn't find anything better. So we're stuck with happiness hour, but
there you go.
It works. So I'm going to just turn this over to you so that you can get right into your program. And I know I glossed over your bio. So if there's something you'd like to share, or, something I, horribly missed, please take advantage of, taking the microphone for me.
I think you made me sound wonderfully great.
Oh, awesome.
Hopefully you didn't set the bar too high.
Well, now you got to live up to the expectation.
Exactly. Although, you mentioned the Ask Tim Gray email newsletter. As it happens, yesterday marked, it's never ends being kind of scary sounding as soon as I'm formulating the words, getting ready to speak them. But it's now been just over 21 years that I've been publishing a daily question and answer email newsletter for photographers. That's a long time.
It's a long, like every day. Are you sure you didn't skip one or two?
In the early days, I would not send it out when I was traveling.
Okay.
Then when I started traveling a lot more, that became a problem. So for the last pretty good long time, it's been basically every weekday morning, except for, some holidays, I suppose. And, funny enough, when I first started this email newsletter, it was in response to the fact that I was getting a lot of emails from photographers. It was around about the time, I was starting to write magazine articles, and I'm not sure if I'd written my first book yet, but I was starting to get known in the community of photographers, particularly as a Photoshop expert. And I was getting a lot of questions and a lot of repeat questions. And in my mind, I thought, I'll publish this as an email newsletter so that everybody on the newsletter can get the answers. And then I won't have to answer that question ever again. I actually thought that there would come a point where I would run out of questions.
That's amazing. That's
probably one of the craziest thoughts I ever had, because the questions keep coming. In fact, faster than I can answer them, as it turns out. But
it keeps you in business too.
Yeah.
Gives you something to do,
I always say, thank goodness that companies like Adobe make their software, and other camera manufacturers make their hardware all very confusing. it's great job security for me that these tools, and as if it's not enough, you learn Photoshop, then they come out with a new version and they confuse a few things and introduce challenges, which, a new release of Lightroom Classic and Photoshop just came out at Adobe Max. And so there's been a lot of questions about where did this feature go and why is this broken and why doesn't this work the way it used to work? So it's keeping me busy, to be sure. So clearly still answering questions 21 years later.
Are you able to like reach out to them directly? Do they know you by like the guy that can dissect their software and they help you, or
Oh,
you
meaning
have?
Adobe?
Yeah.
I am involved in their testing program,
Oh,
and so I do participate in their, these sort of feedback groups that they do. They don't always listen to me. I wish that they would. I wish I was the first call they would make when, here's our feature list. Do you think this is good? What should we do differently? Because I have opinions and there are lots of things I would like them to do differently. But, I do have a voice at the table, but, just one voice among many, many different voices that have Adobe's ear.
there's like 30 something people in this room. If we all wrote them and said, would you just listen to what Tim has to say?
Only Tim. It's the only voice you need to listen to. That would
All
be
right.
fantastic.
I'll see what I can do.
There you go. Exactly.
You're going to get blocked.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. I'm out of the program.
I won't help you. All right.
There you go. All right, well, I'll go ahead and share my screen then so we can take a look at Lightroom Classic, because as I mentioned, there is a new version, Lightroom Classic 12, that just came out. What has that been? A couple weeks, give or take, something like that. I think it was somewhere around October 18th, give or take, that this new version released. And there's a couple of really important features, I would say. One, which I'm not really covering tonight, but content-aware remove for image cleanup. This is something that Lightroom Classic and Lightroom before it has been missing for a very long time. Finally, in version 12, they decided that it's not just for Photoshop anymore. Lightroom Classic gets that content-aware technology. But what I want to focus on primarily tonight is the masking features and some of the new ones. I'll show some of the old ones. I know some of you maybe are using Lightroom Classic and have been for a long time. Maybe some of you have never even heard of Lightroom Classic. Some of you perhaps have heard of Lightroom Classic, but you're afraid of it based on what your friends have told you about their experience with Lightroom Classic. And so depending on your level, this will kind of, feed a number of potential needs or help in a variety of different ways, giving you an overview, giving you some insights, and hopefully helping you get a sense of what's possible. And especially if you're already using Lightroom Classic, I hope inspiring you a little bit to play with these tools a little bit more, because I do have to give credit to Adobe. I give Adobe a hard time, especially when they change features that I don't want them to change, or they remove features that I didn't want them to remove. But they do a great job in a lot of respects. They really do listen to the community, and a lot of the features in Lightroom Classic and some of those that I'll show you tonight are based on feedback that they've thankfully listened to. And I do have to say, I'm pretty impressed with some of the capabilities here. So we'll show those off a little bit. I want to start off, though, not talking about targeted adjustments. Targeted adjustments are focused on changing the appearance of a specific area of the photo. You just need to darken the sky, or you just need to brighten up the foreground. But I want to take a little bit of a step back and talk about just adjusting in general. And I do find that many photographers, regardless of what software they're using to optimize their photos, there's a tendency to get a little bit robotic, that you always increase contrast with this particular tool, or you boost the color saturation with this other tool, and that you kind of just go through the motions without giving too much thought to the image. And I really do believe that each image deserves to have a little bit of special attention, essentially. And so I want to share one image here and kind of guide you through some of the thought process. This is a photo. I won't give you the long story because it is a little bit of a long story, but I had a really incredible experience in Japan. First time I visited Japan, this was in Tokyo. I also had the opportunity to visit Kyoto. And I was in this little square, and long story short, I was photographing, and an elderly woman called me over to one of the temples or shrines, and she proceeded, with no English, to my no Japanese, except maybe ordering some sushi at the sushi bar, but without the benefit of language, she taught me to pray at this Buddhist shrine. And it was a really overwhelming experience, an incredible experience. And as part of that experience, I had captured the photo that you see here, but I was not super happy with the picture. This is how it came out of the camera, and it wasn't as sort of grandiose as I expected, in part because it wasn't matching the mood. And this is one of the earlier images where I really, I think, got in touch with this concept of focusing on kind of the mood of the photo. A lot of people say, what's the story you're trying to tell with your photo? That might apply as well. For me, that is usually not the case. It's usually about color or texture or mood. But what's kind of the vibe of the image, or at least your intention for that mood or the vibe of the image? And so I started thinking about the experience and some of the words that would come to mind, timeless, or, old or ancient, and some of the traditions were very old. And this sense of kind of an ethereal, almost dreamlike state, and just all the different things that made this a meaningful experience for me. And then I started trying to think, okay, well, what does that translate into in terms of the appearance of the photo? What would an image look like that exhibits those sort of traits, those emotions that I felt connected this whole experience? And so the first thing that came to mind was black and white, that the color in this case was distracting, that I should pull that color out of the image so that it really came down to the textures, sort of simplifying the image, maybe giving it a little more of an old time or timeless sort of a quality. And so here in Lightroom Classic, I'm in the develop module, and over on the right panel in the basics section, we have our treatment options of color versus black and white. So the first step is just simply to convert to black and white, just to choose black and white. We can always come down then to the B and W, or black and white section, and adjust the mix, which means essentially lightening or darkening based on the underlying colors. So let's take the blues and make them really dark, and let's take the greens and make them really bright, or whatever the case might be. Here, I won't worry about that too much because the image was relatively monochromatic, so we're not going to see a dramatic difference in any event. But I would probably enhance some contrast. So the clarity adjustment is one of my favorites for boosting mid-tone contrast. Texture is sort of like a sharpening effect, getting those real fine textures to stand out a little bit more. And I started getting closer to what I thought was an appropriate result, an appropriate vision, if you will, for this image. And then thinking about this a little more, it's maybe a little bit cliche, a little bit stereotypic, but when I think of an old photo, I often think of sepia tone type of effect. Now, fun fact, it's not that sepia tone pictures are the old ones, it's that the sepia tone pictures are the ones that survived, because the sepia tone is actually a preservative. And so, I think many of us, I certainly associate that sepia tone, which is kind of a brownish color tint, I associate that with an old picture, but it's in large part because those are the old pictures that survived. So again, on the right panel, I'm going to go into the color grading section where we can add color or shift color even to a black and white image. And so I'll just use the shadow sliders, for example, and I'll take with this color wheel control, what I'm doing is adjusting saturation by moving outward within the circle. So outward is more saturated, inward is less saturated, and around the color wheel enables me to adjust the actual color. So I'll go find kind of a little bit of an orangey type of a color, not too saturated, essentially getting a little bit of a brown tone into the image. So something along those lines. I can also shift that balance only to the shadows and choose how I'm blending the result in. I'll use a stronger blend there and then just cut back the saturation, and somewhere around about there. We won't worry about getting the image absolutely perfect at the moment, just getting that concept across. But again, adding a little bit of a color, a monochrome color, just a single color, in order to give this image, again, a little bit of an older look. And then the last thing that I did in this particular case with this particular image was apply a vignette, which in the context of Lightroom Classic means using the post-crop vignetting. And so a relatively dramatic darkening of those edges. So bringing that amount slider down to a negative value, pushing that out using the midpoint slider, so not really far into the center of the image, but pushing that outward a little bit, out toward the edges of the photo, maybe feather it a little more. So we've got this feathering, this blending effect for the darkening of the edges. And this gets us pretty close to what I felt was an appropriate ending point for the image, where it's a little bit more dramatic. It's a little more mysterious, I think, and kind of dreamlike. And more importantly, whether or not you like the image, this does get the photo closer to what I felt matched the mood of the experience that I had in that particular experience in Tokyo. And so, taking the image, well, in this case, I'll have to go back into the history and go to there. So this is the original starting point, and that is the finishing point there, again, just to give you a sense. And naturally, in this case, I'm not yet talking about targeted adjustments. We're looking at global adjustments, meaning we're affecting the entire image. But regardless of the type of adjustment you're applying to a photo, I really think it's very important that you give some thought to, what are you really trying to accomplish with this photo? What is it about the photo that you like and you want to enhance? What is it about the photo that you maybe don't like as much and you want to kind of tone down a little bit? And what would you just like, to fine tune, to refine just a little bit? And to think about that, not only in the context of, sort of what can I do to improve the photo, but what can I do to get this photo closer to my experience of having witnessed this scene or gone through a particular experience, or the mood that you're trying to convey, regardless of what the original scene looked like. You can interpret the mood in any way you want. To be thoughtful about that, so that as you're making decisions about the various adjustments, you're essentially kind of taking a step back and thinking, okay, what does this image really need based on where I really want this image to go? Admittedly, in many cases, you might look at the photo and your answer is, I have no idea. And in those cases, you might start playing around with the image a little bit and start testing things out. That's one of the beautiful things about Lightroom Classic, is that absolutely everything you're doing here is non-destructive in the context of the develop module. If you delete your photos from Lightroom Classic, that can still be very destructive. But feel free, when you're adjusting an image, to just go crazy with it. Just do anything you think might work, no matter how wild it seems, because you can always undo or refine or even just reset the controls altogether. And so I wanted to start with that as kind of a framing point for all of the adjustments that I'll talk about. I'm going to talk about some of these adjustments fairly quickly, just because I want to give you a little bit of a foundation for how targeted adjustments work in Lightroom Classic. So I'm not trying to overwhelm you, but I am going to go a little bit quickly so that I can spend more time on some of the more kind of interesting advanced features when it comes to applying targeted adjustments. But the basic idea, I always say, a targeted adjustment involves two ingredients. There's the targeted and there's the adjustment, which is to say, well, the easier part is the adjustment itself, right? So maybe I want to darken an area of the photo. So the adjustment might be darkening. The targeted is, in the parlance of Lightroom Classic, masking, or in Photoshop, that would be a layer mask in conjunction with an adjustment. And I really think it's easier to think of that as just a stencil. It's a stencil that defines a specific area of the image that you want to work on. And so sort of like we might kind of pre-visualize, in the words of Ansel Adams, what the final print might look like, so too can we think about what our stencil or what our mask might look like. And so using a very simple example to put these two components together, here for this image, let's say I want to darken the sky. Well, I'll have a darkening adjustment. What is my mask or my stencil going to be? Well, it's going to be the sky, but we're not quite to that level of sophistication just yet. One type of adjustment we might apply to a sky is a gradient. So we'll use that as just a very simple effect, a gradient where we're adjusting the image up at the top in this case, and then we're not adjusting it at the bottom, and we're going to have some degree of transition in between. So let's take a look at masking. So within the develop module, over on the right panel, there is a toolbar down below the histogram display. And at the far right of that is the masking button. So I'll click the masking button, and here I can choose what type of mask or stencil I want to create. So I'm going to use the linear gradient as a relatively simple starting point. So I'll just click on linear gradient. And then within the image, I can click and drag. And notice that we have the masks panel. I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but that is just showing us the mask itself, the targeted adjustment that we're applying to a stenciled area of the image. And I'll just click and drag. You can hold the shift key, by the way, to lock that to a perfectly vertical or perfectly horizontal gradient. And let's just assume that I want a transition of something like that. Notice that I get this sort of red pinkish overlay indicating the area of the image that will be adjusted. So that's my mask or my stencil. some might refer to this as a selection. That's a term that we use very often in Photoshop, not so much in Lightroom, but it's a reasonable analogy in this case. It performs very much the same task. And so now I can apply whatever adjustment. I'll just apply an exaggerated exposure adjustment. And so now I've darkened, well, I've extremely darkened the sky, but in this smooth transition where the top of the image is getting the full adjustment, the bottom of the image is getting none of the adjustment, and there's a nice transition in between. Again, I mentioned all of this is non-destructive, so I can grab the center here and click and drag that gradient up or down. I can grab the edges to tighten up or expand the transition, that gradation transition. And so I can really fine tune the mask. I can go back and fine tune the adjustment. So this was obviously, for me, I think this is a little bit too dark. Maybe somebody thinks this is awesome. It looks like, it was photographed at night with a fill flash or some such effect without any stars in the sky. But the point is that we can then go back and refine the adjustment as well. So we can change the mask or that stencil, we can change the adjustment, and we can keep going back and forth as many times as we need to get things looking good. Now, of course, this is a very simple example. Things can get more complicated, but also Photoshop and Lightroom Classic have these features that enable us to get more powerful. I should mention, by the way, for those that are not using Lightroom Classic, perhaps yet, you can also access these same features in Adobe Camera Raw, which is part of Photoshop. So the same concepts will apply there. And of course, there's other things we can do in Photoshop when it comes to targeted adjustments. So here we have a little bit more challenging situation, you might say, because we do have a sky, but the gradient is not going to work very well, because if I were to draw that same type of a gradient, from the top of the sky down toward the bottom, it's going to overlap with the rock formations here, the mitten at the center of the image, for example, and it will darken, in that particular case, the top of the mitten. And I don't want that. I only want to adjust the sky. So I go back to my masking set of features here, and you'll see that Adobe has conveniently included a sky option. And this is an automatic option for creating a mask for the sky based on artificial intelligence, analyzing the image. And it's not always perfect, but I've got to say, it does a remarkably good job most of the time, dare I say. So I'm simply going to click sky. That's all I have to do. And you'll see that the image gets analyzed, the sky gets selected, if you will, or masked, so that now we've got the color overlay. So I get a pretty clear indication. It might not be perfect, but it would be hard to tell in this case because of that red overlay blending in a little bit with the rock formations. We can change the color of the overlay on the masks panel, but we won't worry about that right now because I want to get to the adjustment itself. And I'll just use another exposure adjustment again, just to kind of illustrate that Lightroom Classic has found the sky in the image. And so now I have this targeted adjustment that is only affecting the sky. And I'm using exposure just because it's a somewhat dramatic adjustment. I can use a variety of other adjustments. Now, I don't have access to the full complement of adjustments that are available on the right panel in the develop module when we're working globally. There's just a subset. So if I go down a little bit too far here, you'll see the basic panel that's normally at the top of the right panel in terms of the adjustments. That's down below these masking controls. But I could, for example, boost the saturation. Maybe I won't darken the sky quite so much. I could shift the hue around if I want to make some sort of, wild image, or maybe just, fine tune it to a more cobalt looking sky, or whatever the case might be. There are still ways, I won't worry about that for this image for the moment, but there are still ways we could modify the mask if need be. I will demonstrate some of the sort of compound masking capabilities a little bit later. But for now, I think it's enough to say that this is a pretty cool feature that it can select the sky. Let's go find a trickier situation here. We've got this tree with all the little leaves and the hills in the background. So the sky is kind of in all these little pieces. I've actually not tested this with this feature, so taking a gamble here that it might work reasonably well, and that looks pretty good. A little bit of areas, gaps in between the leaves and branches that maybe are not fully selected. They have a little bit more faint red color overlay, but once again, by applying that adjustment, you can see not perfect. So notice here in the middle of the tree, some kind of brighter areas of sky. we could go in there and clean that up if we needed to, but also this is a very exaggerated adjustment, so it's kind of amplifying the shortcoming, as it were. But I have to say that it's a pretty impressive starting point, and this would be one of the more challenging situations. And how much are we likely going to darken the sky? Maybe this, even I would say, is maybe a bit on the too dark side as far as the sky is concerned. When we get to a more kind of normal or typical adjustment, then suddenly things blend in much more readily. And so some pretty impressive image analysis. And keep in mind, this can constantly be getting updated in the background by Adobe. This is based on analysis of the results with countless images that they perform testing on. And so these features are only going to get more and more accurate over time. Let's take a look at another challenging scenario, because we selected the sky through some trees, but here we have an airplane, obviously, and you'll notice there is no airplane selection option over on the right-hand side here for our masking controls. But I still think that Lightroom Classic might be able to do a pretty good job of enabling me to apply an adjustment that only affects, in this case, let's say, the airplane, which I would call the key subject in this case. And there is a masking feature, again, based on image analysis, for creating a mask, or a selection, as it were, of the key subject. I'll go ahead and click that button. Nothing more to do here. And if you look too closely, I always say, if you want to look good in terms of evaluating images that I've worked on, this is not as high a res shot as I thought it was. There we go. We'll zoom that out. The trick to making all your images look like they were optimized to perfection is to zoom out to a very small zoom setting. But if we fit that image back in the available space, actually, let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit and pan around. You'll see we've got a little bit of that red overlay in between the wings and the sprayers of this crop duster. And we had, in between, so we've got these struts at the horizontal stabilizer, so some issues back there. But overall, this is pretty impressive, including the little arc of the propeller right in there. That is, I think, pretty fantastic. Let's just apply an exaggerated adjustment. We can get a sense of that. Again, there's a couple of areas that would need to be cleaned up there. There are ways that we can perform that cleanup work in terms of those masks in Lightroom Classic. But again, the ability to create an automatic mask based on image analysis to hopefully figure out what the subject was. Let's go try it again for this image. And even better in this case, even though there's a little bit of fuzziness on the edge of the flower, you can see that it did a pretty good job of getting that targeted adjustment working very nicely. But wait, there's more. Let's, shall we take a look at this image? Another shot at Monument Valley with some photographer getting in the way. Of course, that's me, but getting in my own way. But I would argue, possibly, actually, now that I think about it, the photographer who took this picture probably would argue with this and suggest that I'm not the key subject here. The mitten in the background, the rock formation, is the key subject. I just got in the way. But we'll pretend like I'm the key subject here. But I don't want to adjust the subject. I think, well, not really. I was going to say I think I look pretty good there, but although less gray hair, this was a long time ago. So from that standpoint, it looks better. But I don't want to adjust me. I want to adjust the background. Well, one of the new features in Lightroom Classic 12 is this automated background masking option. And that is actually, dare I say it, not exactly anything special, except it's a really cool shortcut. So subject has been around for a little while. Background has not been, but background is just the inverse or the opposite of subject. So if I chose subject and then inverted the mask, I would get the same result as background. But why go to all that extra effort when you can just click the brand new background button? So I'll click that button, and that's looking pretty good. It missed one of my shoes and it missed my camera strap, but that's not too bad, all things considered. And again, we do have the ability, I promise, to be able to go back and refine these masks a bit. But again, just to kind of give you a sense here, that we've got a pretty effective, remember, this took essentially 2 clicks, or one click and drag. Very little, virtually no effort went into applying this targeted adjustment because the mask itself was created automatically based on image analysis. I didn't even tell Lightroom Classic which area of the image represented the key subject. It figured that out on its own, mostly by focus, areas that are sharp versus not so sharp, also by colors and textures and tonality and those sorts of things. So it did a not perfect job, but I think a rather impressive job, all things considered. But we also, going beyond the purely automated options, we also have some features that enable us to, you might say, give Lightroom Classic a little bit of help to push it in the right direction when it comes to creating a mask for a particular area. And that's with the new objects feature for masking. Now, you might be familiar in Photoshop, there is an object selection tool, and that enables you to define areas. It also includes, which is not yet in Lightroom Classic, but it also includes a completely automated approach to selecting objects where it analyzes the image and then figures out where there are objects. So with this image, for example, it would certainly recognize that there's a hot air balloon. Well, Photoshop wouldn't necessarily know it was a hot air balloon, but it would know it's an object and that this is another object over here, and the sky in the background might represent another object. And so we would have the ability to just say, okay, thank you, Photoshop, for analyzing. I want this hot air balloon, or I want that hot air balloon, or I want the sky or the water or the building or whatever the case might be. We're not quite that far in Lightroom Classic, but I hope that we will get there soon to match those capabilities in Photoshop. But we do have the sort of guided object selection, which is part of the object selection tool in Photoshop. And so I'm going to choose objects here. And you'll notice that we have, if you look closely there, we have a couple of mode buttons. One's got a little paintbrush and one just has a little rectangle there. And that means we can either paint over the object to try to create our mask, or we can just draw a rectangle, a rectangular marquee, you might say, over the area that contains the object and let the image be analyzed only in that area to try to find the specific object. So let's start off with the easier, I suppose, the rectangular option there. So I'll click that second button and I'll just come out into the image and click and drag in order to create an automatic mask, or semi-automatic, I guess we should say, based on drawing a rectangle, which is essentially saying, hey, Lightroom Classic, please go check out that area of the image and see what you can find in that area. And so if I'm just going to undo and go back. Oops, I just clicked subject, which I don't want. I'm going to go back to object, draw a rectangle again. It could be this object, or if we use that exact same feature and put our rectangle around both, we mostly, you might be able to tell, we're missing a little bit at the top right corner, as it were, of the hot air balloon. But again, pretty impressive in terms of being able to analyze an area and come up with the objects that are there. I'll show you a little bit more impressive example in a moment, or at least I hope it will be more impressive. But we also have, remember, that brush feature. And here, what we want to do is paint over the area of the image that contains the object, but make sure that you paint a little bit beyond the object itself. We want the entire edge or boundary of the object to be included in the area that you painted. And we can adjust the brush size. So we have, of course, there's a size slider over on the right panel for our select objects feature, but we can also use the left and right square bracket keys on the keyboard. If I wanted to make a smaller or larger brush, left square bracket key to make a smaller brush, right square bracket key to make a larger brush. And I'll just go ahead and you see that familiar red overlay as I'm painting that shows that I'm painting over that smaller of the two hot air balloons, well, further away of the two hot air balloons. I've covered up the entire hot air balloon. I release the mouse. After a little bit of analysis, I get an automatic selection of that area. And so, again, a little bit of a helping hand, as it were, guiding Lightroom Classic to which area of the image should be looked at. This gives you the opportunity to be real careful with that painting so that you're not including areas of the image that might confuse Lightroom Classic. But that was, admittedly, this image, a pretty simple example where we're creating these selections for objects that stand out so clearly against the sky. Let's take a look at a more tricky example, once again using that objects feature, and we'll just try the rectangle in this case. And we did make a reference to happy hour as opposed to just happiness hour at the top of the program. And so got a little beer here and that I'm desperately reaching for. Let's draw a rectangle around that beer and see, with the clutter of those fingers in the background and the shadows way off in the background and the rock in the foreground. Let's see how Lightroom Classic does. That's pretty impressive. And so we now have a pretty good selection. Oh, no, we don't. We got the fingers in there. I was so impressed until I looked closer, but still pretty impressive, and something that would be very, very easy to fix. And I do promise that I'll give you a couple, well, at least one example, see how much time we have, but examples of being able to go back and clean that sort of thing up. It's actually quite easy. So again, being able to create these object-based selections with a little bit of help, kind of guiding Lightroom Classic. And in fact, let's just take a look. I'm just going to delete the mask, and we're going to start again with the painting option. Let's see if I'm being a little bit more careful instead of footloose and fancy free here. If I make a smaller painting, which again, it takes a little bit more time, but not a tremendous amount of time. Now let's see what we end up with. How's that? Much, much better. It looks fantastic without zooming in. No, I think it actually looks very good altogether. So, the right tool for the right job, obviously, it takes a little bit more time to paint rather than just draw a rectangle in many cases. But point being, still impressive technology. And perhaps most importantly, in my experience, the vast majority of the time, it at least gives me a really good starting point that saves me quite a bit of time when it comes to what would otherwise be a very manual process of creating a mask to define a particular area. All right, let's take a look at a few other examples of some of the things we can create selections based on. And, a lot of this comes down to what's sort of obvious or what stands out about the area that you're trying to create a selection of, or the opposite of it, because we could always invert, we could flip that mask essentially. But let's assume that we want to create a mask. We want to apply a targeted adjustment to the water in this case. This is the island of Capri in Italy. So of course the water already looks perfect, but maybe we want to enhance it just a little bit more. I might want to define a mask. Now, in theory, I could try all sorts of options. I could try background. I'm not sure. Actually, just out of curiosity, let's see what that does. It selects almost the entire image. Or, the key subject is going to be that rock, of course, over on the left-hand side. But we also can create selections. Might not be super obvious at first glance, but selections based on color. And that is found down in the range control. And so I'll go ahead and click range and choose color range. And then we can define the area of the image. So we can sample an area of the image that contains the colors that we want to work with. So here we've got a pretty good color separation between the water and the land. And so I can just click. So I've got a little eyedropper here. I can click into the water, and that's a pretty good starting point. We can also then click and refine. And what you'll find is very often, if you simply click once and then drag that refinement slider, you'll be able to get that color range, including the areas that you actually need to include. So we could certainly sample in various areas of the image and hold the shift key on the keyboard to click and add additional areas. So if I could, you can see, well, maybe you can't see very easily, but I have one sampler there and a second sampler there and a third sampler there. Again, just by holding the shift key while clicking on additional areas, you can see that that last sampler has caused some of the shadow areas on the beach here, as it were, to be included. Well, I can hold the Alt key on Windows or the Option key on Macintosh. There's the sampler I want to remove. So Alt or Option key while I click on that sampler. And actually, I think this one also added some of those areas of the shoreline as well. So I want to be careful not to click on these kind of dark, shadowy areas. But as you saw initially, Actually, just increasing that refine value does pretty good. I'll add another sampler out here, bring refinement down just a little bit, and you can kind of continue playing with that just a little bit. Again, as I've said so many times already, keeping in mind that we can always refine this mask in other ways, as we'll see shortly. But at that point, then, let's say we want the water to be, emerald blue, that'd be a cobalt blue rather than a kind of emerald green, or it's a St. Patrick's Day celebration, or, whatever the case might be. We could certainly apply that targeted adjustment. But the point being is that you'll likely find in a variety of situations that you can create a targeted adjustment, define a targeted adjustment based on a color value within the image. And in some cases, let's see if I have a good example. Well, which one's going to work best? Let's go with this image to create a variation on that theme, and that is a luminance range. Now, this is not an option that you're likely going to be able to use as often as you might assume. It can be helpful sometimes for selecting a bright sky versus a dark foreground, but very often you'll find there's some overlap. But let me show you just briefly how this functions. Once I have selected that option for the luminance range from the range pop-up, you'll see that I have this interesting control with some slider handles, essentially. And so what I can do is define the edge of my boundary in terms of luminance. So here I'm dragging the left edge over toward the right. And so the range of tonal values that is still being adjusted, still being affected by my adjustment, is this brighter range. Now, we have more controls than you might actually automatically assume. Let me pull these in just so that we can talk about it in a little bit more detail here. So we have this sort of rectangular box that defines the area of the image being affected. And by area in this case, I mean the tonal range. So here, kind of the middle tones, the not too dark and not too bright. So this box represents tonal values within the image that will be completely affected by our adjustment. To the outside of that, we have these little trapezoids. They look like little houses almost. And this range in between the box and that trapezoid slider, those areas represent the area of transition, the area that will have a tapering off of that adjustment. And then once we get outside of that range, so here from the, let's call that 25% brightness down to 0, we'll get no adjustment. And up here from, let's call it 20% or 80% bright, all the way up to 100%, that area will not be affected either. So a little bit tricky. Generally, you'll want some degree of feathering, but it does take a little bit of fine tuning to try to find, just the right range. So let's assume we want to work on the foreground, but not the sky. Obviously, we could select the sky automatically and invert. So another reason you're not super likely to use this particular option, this luminance range option, but we could, get a pretty good starting point, right about there, and then do some cleanup work. A good example, I would say, of a situation where in theory, we just want the bright areas, but there's bright areas on the mountain and there's bright areas in the grass down below, et cetera. So not going to work completely perfectly. And so this is one of the more limited options in terms of being able to define a mask that's going to be close to perfect. Usually there's going to be a lot more cleanup work required with a luminance mask option. All right. And so then let's take a look at here we are, the depth range image. So this is a little bit of a specialty feature, not available to everyone. But if you're using an iPhone, for example, you have portrait mode. Some Android smartphones also have, I don't remember now if they call it portrait. I think they have a different name for it. But in any event, the narrow depth of field effect that we can get with an iPhone using portrait mode, for example, or certain Android smartphones. And the way that actually works, a smartphone, because it has a very, very tiny sensor, it's not able to get very narrow depth of field. And it can't focus very closely, so you can't even get narrow depth of field by focusing on a macro subject, for example. And so these portrait mode options, it works by essentially taking two pictures, one in focus and one out of focus. And it determines the distance, essentially for each pixel in the image. It figures figures out how far away it was from the camera. And so that creates this depth map that can be used as a mask in Lightroom Classic. And so here, we have an object that was obviously in the foreground and some stuff that's obviously way off in the background. And this was shot with a smartphone with portrait mode feature, an iPhone in this particular case, using that portrait mode feature. And so we have an option for that under range as well, and that is our depth range. Think of this as being essentially the exact same thing in concept as what we just looked at with luminance, except the luminance is not for the photo itself. Luminance represents distance. So think as white as being really far away and black as being really close, with all those shades of gray being at varying distances in between. And so a similar control that we just looked at with our luminance option, but I can now, let's actually pull in the foreground areas. No, that's what I meant. The background areas, so that we're only adjusting the foreground. So again, I mentioned that white, or the brights, represent the far away areas, and the darks, as it were, represent the close in areas. And so we can define which areas of the photo we want to affect. We want to adjust the middle ground. Now, this is not perfect, needless to say. So here I'm adjusting the middle areas, middle distance. And apparently this area of sky, which was definitely far away, is considered to be about as close to the camera as this chair that was, just down below. And so not perfect by any stretch, but pretty impressive overall in terms of being able to enable us. What I would say is, if you use the portrait feature, it's as good as the portrait feature. Not perfect, but usually pretty impressive. And so we also have that feathering ability. So I could apply, let's put a little less feathering here, try to get, a reasonably accurate final mask for this foreground object. I have to push this out just a little bit further, and that's gonna work pretty well there. Still some areas to clean up, but again, the point being that we can use those embedded depth maps to apply targeted adjustment, and we can always come back, of course, and refine that mask, so to clear away some of those areas of the mask, which I promise I'm going to get to very soon, unless we run out of time. But I promise not to run out of time.
We're good.
But
We're good.
because first, I want to show you another really cool feature. And I say that recognizing that it's not a feature that I use very often, because it represents a category of photography that I don't have a tendency to do very much of. But that is the ability to select. We'll start with this image, just because it'll give us a closer look. People. So I don't have a tendency to photograph people very often. I'm sure some of you do photograph people, at least more often than I do. But when we have a photograph of a person or people, there can be multiple people in the frame. I don't happen to have pictures with multiple people in the frame right now, because most of those include my wife, and she doesn't like me using photos of her. But here we've got a person anyway. And when we're in the masking feature, among our various other masking options, if the photo contains people, you'll see people down below. And you see a little thumbnail representation. There's my little face represented as person 1. That looks pretty good. If I hover my mouse over person 1 here, you can see the red overlay. This time it did catch this camera strap here, which I guess technically is not part of me, but we'll let it count. It got a little bit of the backpack, but not all of it. So I'll just hover over that again so you can see that. Good. Oh, no, it didn't include the lens, but it did include the camera body and the strap. So, if we kind of analyze that a little bit, it's mixed, but pretty good. And I mean, come on, it's pretty impressive. If you had to create this mask on your own, that would be a bit time consuming. But wait, there's more. What if the only thing you wanted to change about this person was their hair, or their face, or their skin, or all of them? We have options. So I'm going to go to person 1 in this case, click on the person. Now the person features are being detected. And so as I hover my mouse over, it'll look a little weird, obviously, because we get that red overlay. But as I hover my mouse over each of the checkboxes here, the text for the checkbox, face skin. Well, that's obviously skin on the face, but not things like, in this case, the hands and arms. Or body skin, which would be everything except the face, so the neck, the arms, the hands. The eyebrows, pretty self-explanatory. The eye sclera, if I'm being honest, I had to Google that, and I still don't know how to pronounce it, but that's the whites of the eyes. Why did they have to call it that word? Probably because they wanted to embarrass me, because I give Adobe a hard time when they don't listen to me about features. Iris and pupil, obviously, you can kind of barely see. If you focus in on the eyes there, you'll see the little red in the center representing the iris and pupil. The lips, needless to say. Teeth, self-explanatory. Hair, there we go. And now I'm a clown. And so we have all of these options for the person or people that were detected automatically. And so we could, for example, let's assume a pretty common issue is having color for the skin that's not quite right. For me, for example, especially if I've been out in the sun a little bit, I might look really red and I need to tone down the saturation. And so we could go turn on the checkboxes individually for the face skin, the body skin, and maybe we would also include the lips in that case, I suppose. And so if I move my mouse out of the way there, you'll see that, well, now I look really sunburned, but it's only because of that red color overlay. But now I have this mask. It's not yet created. It's just a preview of the mask that I could create. I could add the hair to that if I wanted to, etc. And then when I'm ready, I can create the mask. There's also an option to create 3 separate masks, just kind of a quick way to have individual masks for each of these. If we, for example, we're selecting the lips and the teeth, we're probably going to apply different adjustments to each of those, or the skin and the hair, those would call for different adjustments. So you could create individual masks for each of those checkboxes. I would tend to kind of mix and match on my own and create the compound mask. So I'll go ahead and create that mask. And now we can, reduce the saturation or increase the saturation. Give me, a little more color, shift the color. We could make a Leprechaun movie, or or a Frankenstein or something like that. So we can have all sorts of fun mangling photos of our nearest and dearest friends. But more to the point is that we can create these really automated adjustments based on image analysis that will even include all of these various adjustments for the people. I'm just going to reset this image, let the person again be detected, just to illustrate once again. So we've got the entire person, which in this case does get both, well, most of both shoes, does get the camera strap. It's missing a little tiny piece of my glasses, and it is missing my lens, which is perfectly fine in this case. But again, we have all those individual elements that we can work with as well to, brighten and whiten teeth, and to add some texture to the hair and smooth out the skin, and or just select the entire person, create a mask for that person, and apply whatever adjustment we'd like to the person. So again, a pretty, I think, impressive capability in terms of automating this process. Now, as I may have mentioned, I don't remember if I specifically mentioned this throughout tonight's presentation or not. Maybe I did, that we have some ability to go back and refine. So let's see how we do with a subject. Oh, well, that was too good. Which was one of the images? Oh, here, we'll use the crop duster, even though that's a tricky one. And so it's going to be a little bit challenging. But let's go ahead. I'm going to, actually, this mask I think is perfectly fine because I didn't do any tweaking to it. Yeah, we're good. And so we can mix and match. Let me start with a simpler example now that I think of it. So that we get a better sense of the basics of this mixing and matching. And we'll come to a slightly more complicated scenario there in a second. But I have, for example, this mask. This was the sky mask, you'll recall. It's called Sky. And so we've adjusted the sky, but remember the first image that I worked on for the sky, I used a gradient. Wouldn't it be cool to mix both of those? That would be very cool. Adjust the sky, but then, for example, subtract part of that adjustment for the bottom portion of the sky. Well, we can add to or subtract from a mask using the add or subtract buttons. Who knew? And so here I have my sky mask, for example. So there's the sky, but let's assume that I want my adjustment. In fact, let's exaggerate the adjustment here just so it's a little bit more obvious. I want to subtract from the bottom or from the top or from the side, whatever it might be. I'm going to subtract using a linear gradient, and I'll subtract from the bottom. So maybe I'll go from, around about there's where my mouse is, click and drag upward. And again, obviously I have an exaggerated adjustment here, but notice that I'm subtracting in a linear gradient fashion, but I'm not messing with the rock formations. So the sky mask is still in control, you might say. I'm just subtracting a piece of it so that now I'm adjusting the sky, and only the sky, not any of the rock formations, but I'm doing so in this case with a gradient. So I'm mixing and matching, in this case, a couple of reasonably automated masking tools in order to improve upon the final result there. But let's, and I'm not going to worry, disclaimer here, especially because, we're almost at the end of our happiness hour, when the happiness, I suppose, must end. But I'm not going to worry about getting this absolutely perfect, because that would take a little bit more time. And I always get nervous when everybody's watching me. And so we're going to go in and make an adjustment here. So for our key subject, let's go ahead and apply an exaggerated darkening, which, by the way, even when you're making use of the overlay for a mask, I do find that it can be really helpful. I can turn on the overlay manually if I want to. I have a tendency to prefer just applying an exaggerated adjustment, because it works generally for just about any scenario, because I can choose which adjustment is going to make that area stand out the best. And so we won't go into tremendous detail here, but I obviously in this case need to subtract from an area of the image. And so I'm going to choose that subtract option. And in this case, I'm just going to use the brush feature, which we haven't talked about yet, but this is just a simple. I'm going to show you a bonus feature after this that illustrates that it's not quite as simple as it might necessarily seem at first glance. And again, we're not going to worry about the quality of the results here. I just want to illustrate the concept. I could use a smaller brush here. Again, the left and right square bracket keys on the keyboard to get a smaller brush to get into some of these little fine details. But I'm just going to kind of real quickly go through here. We'll leave the nozzles in place. We'll, erase that effect. So I'm literally just changing the shape of the ultimate mask that's being used to apply this targeted adjustment just by, in this case, painting. It could be any of those various techniques that we've already looked at where I can mix and match. There's also this area in here, which I would really need a smaller brush to get into those little nooks and crannies. But again, I'll just do a real quick, rough job here just to give you a sense that I can erase that darkening adjustment just by using that subtract feature for my mask in conjunction, in this case, with the brush feature. But just real quickly to give you a sense of the basic capabilities that go beyond the basics of the brush feature, I'll just start off with the brush feature for this image. And for the brush, of course, we have the size and the feathering, but there's also an auto mask feature. And so the basic idea here, let me make that brush a little bit larger, and I'll work up in this corner initially. Basic idea is that I want to keep the plus, the crosshair as it were, at the center of my brush in the area that I want to select, but I want to overlap with the area that I don't want to select. So I want to select the sky, but using this auto mask feature, I want to overlap my circle with the building. So keep the crosshair away from the building, but keep the circle overlapping with the building, and the edge will be detected automatically. Yes, I know we could use the sky feature to automatically find the sky in this case, and it would work wonderfully well, but then I wouldn't have the opportunity to show you this auto masking feature, which you probably can already tell. It's not perfect, but it is pretty darn good. It does a pretty good job in most cases. And once I've done the basics of this outer mask, then I can turn off that auto mask feature and just kind of fill in all of the additional areas, including, as needed, I could effectively subtract, or in this case, erase from the areas that were a problem. You might have noticed this tower over here got a little bit affected by the adjustment. So I can, go in there and erase, and then try to use that brush once again, really, really small, and get in there and, try to get that perfect. I'm not going to worry about that at this very moment. But again, point being is that even that simple brush tool for our masking feature has the ability to make use of that auto masking so that we can more or less detect the edges. Now, this is an older feature in the context of masking. If we go ahead and delete this mask, and let's create sky as an automatic selection, and that's already better, it looks like, than I could do with the brush tool. But I could still get in there with a really tiny brush and clean up little areas that had not worked out quite so perfectly. But hopefully you're wildly impressed. That's my real hope. And you're happy, because this is happiness hour. But hopefully you have a much better appreciation of some of the capabilities of Lightroom Classic when it comes to really exercising control. Now, of course, when I'm demonstrating these targeted adjustments, it behooves me to apply some very strong, sometimes wild adjustments so that you can actually see what's going on. Obviously, probably most of the time, I'm not going to be applying those, wild and crazy adjustments. I'm going to be going back to the first image we talked about and try to think about, okay, what can I do to enhance the intended mood of this image, to try to get this image closer to, my vision as a photographer, or what I think best suits the subject or best suits the mood, or what is a reflection of my experience at the time I captured the image, or, whatever the case might be. It's your image, so have fun with it, and hopefully exercise lots of control when it comes to realizing your vision for each and every photo. So I do want to thank you. Are there any questions, Linda, that
I have a couple of questions.
few thousand questions?
No, not that many. Some are all over the place, but let me hone in on. So Valerie's question is, because we're just doing this, this is regarding the subtract mask with brush on the airplane image. She says you didn't use an auto mask, and she's wondering, would that have helped?
It would have. So if we go back in here and zoom in, and in fact, I can just, we'll go back to our subtract. Do we have another area? Well, let's just remove our, that was our, sorry, brush. We'll delete brush, and we'll subtract with our brush, and we'll turn on auto mask. And in that scenario, let's get over here where we can see some more of that work. It should do a pretty good job. So let's test it. It's the only problem is it's going to get confused with some of the plumbing here. And so some of that's getting cut out of the adjustment. You might be able to tell there. I'll make that a little more obvious here in a second. That now the plumbing is not being affected, where the nozzles and the tubing go here. And so not quite perfect. That's a tricky one for that auto mask feature, because there's not as much as it kind of looks like a clear edge to our eye. We've got the bright on top and the dark on the bottom, and we're erasing dark, areas of the image. So a little bit less than perfect in this case, but again, giving us, degree of control. We can always get in there and, paint really, really fine in terms of painting right along that tube if we need to, things like that. But it'll just vary on the circumstances. You can also do things, for example, which I didn't do in this particular case, but if we get rid of that brush, and if we instead, let's see, subtract by color range. So for example, if we were to then subtract areas here based on the color range, then in this particular case, that would work out a little bit better. You can see the green areas, and that's not going to help over here because we had this grayish, and probably if I subtract for color here, I'm going to get, this gray here subtracted, etc. And so there can be some complicated mixing and matching, to be sure, which, sometimes you'll just go in with a really small brush and paint. But in this case, I would say for part of it, some of this, it may be even luminance. So we could use a luminance mask for part of this, in some areas. So it just depends on the particular circumstances. But the auto mask feature, mostly works well when you have a really clear delineation between, for example, the building and the sky, where there's not a lot of variation in terms of tonality for the building, because those other textures tend to, even if you keep that crosshair outside of that area, those other textures have a tendency to confuse the tool a little bit. I'm sure it's one that will get improved in, excuse me, in future updates.
Okay. David is wanting to know, I can use mask to select subject and inverse that to select background, but I can't see how I can then blur the background. Is that possible? And how would he do that?
Yeah, so there's not a great way to do that in Lightroom Classics. That'd be something that I would tend to take the image over to Photoshop for. But let's see, where do I still have? Well, let's just use this and whatever the subject happens to be. So I'm going to create a new mask for subject. This will just be an obvious, but well, that wasn't the best subject selection. But in fact, I'm going to make a new mask, and I'm just going to brush a big area here to demonstrate, but there's not a really good blur feature here. So what you would need to use instead is, oddly enough, sharpness. And so if we go down to the sharpness slider, we can use a negative value. And so there's before, if you pay attention to the wheat in the foreground here, and as I drag sharpness down, you'll see that gets blurred. Not a lot, but a little. You could add another mask for the same, so you could duplicate that mask. Is this, yeah, that's, make sure I'm duplicating the correct mask. So if we duplicate mask 3 and then take the sharpness down and then duplicate that one again. And so we're getting a little bit less and less sharpness, a little more and more blur each time. Frankly, for something like that, I would probably go into Photoshop and work directly there, because you've just got a much more powerful blur capability. You can blur the image so that it's completely unrecognizable when it comes to Photoshop.
Okay. Paul's wanting to know, how can you save all the adjustments?
I was trying to think of a clever way to answer that.
It's too late.
Well, I guess it depends. Yeah, too late. I'm not clever. It depends on exactly what he means. But if I'm understanding the question as he asked it, which is a very common question, you don't. Or another way to say it is that Lightroom is just doing that in real time in the background. I never have to say save. Notice I was jumping around, from this image to that image and another image, and I was never choosing save. I was never clicking OK. It's all just happening in real time. Everything's just being preserved in the Lightroom Classic catalog, and possibly out to metadata even for the images themselves if you've enabled that option in catalog settings. And so there's never a clicking save. Now, if the question is kind of a variation on that, which is also somewhat common, if you say, oh, wow, I really love what you did to the sky to that image, how do I preserve that as its own file? Generally, that would mean exporting a copy of the image. So you might export a JPEG to share online, or export a TIFF to send off and be printed, or to print yourself, or whatever the case might be. But in the context of Lightroom Classic, you don't have to do anything. As you're working, as you're assigning star ratings or adding keywords or applying all sorts of wild adjustments, all of that is being preserved within the catalog in real time.
Okay. Paul, hopefully that answered your question. If not, come back in and I'll get that in front of him. Sue's got a problem. She says with her new problem is with the most recent Lightroom Classic update. When she imports new images and creates a subfolder, she can confirm in her iMac Finder that the subfolder exists in the intended folder. However, it does not appear in Lightroom Classic. Any ideas?
Depends on the particulars. I would say, if making sure it's a subfolder versus a parent folder, and that the subfolder actually includes images, then it certainly should appear. If the photos show up, one handy trick in terms of trying to track down, this photo is not appearing where I thought it was supposed to be in a subfolder, for example, is to right click on the image and choose go to folder in library, which will take you to the library module directly to the folder that contains those images. But if not, probably a little more detail would be helpful. So if maybe she wants to send me an email I know I mentioned at the beginning, I get a ton of email, but make the subject happiness hour,
There you
and
go.
I should catch that. And just tim@timgray.com is my email address. But if you can provide some more details, maybe a screenshot to show me exactly what's going on, then I'm sure we can get to the bottom of that.
Oh, let me ask, maybe I need to correct myself. Thought it was
Sure.
timgrayphoto.com. You just said timgray.com. Did I have it wrong?
You did not have it wrong. So the website is timgrayphoto.com. The email address is tim@timgray.com.
Okay.
Timgray.com will redirect you to Tim Gray Photo. So
Okay.
I have too many websites is basically what it
That's
all
okay.
boiled down to.
Hey, and while we're on it, so what's the best way for people to get on your newsletter list?
So I would say if you want to get on the daily question and answer email list, best thing to do is to go to asktimgrey.com. That's the blog where the questions and answers for my email newsletter show up. And there's a field over on the right-hand side where you can enter your email address to be on that list. I also publish a newsletter that goes out maybe twice a month on average that features just updates on what I'm doing and my workshops and these sorts of things. And so a good option for that is to go to Grey Learning Blog, so GREY learningblog.com, where again you'll find a field over on the right-hand side to add your email to the email list.
Perfect. All right, so let's make this about Darlene's selfish moment. She says, "Hey Tim, can you get?" I'm sorry, that's funny. "Hey Tim, can you get Adobe to put the share button back that let you email a picture right from Photoshop? This was in CC 2021, and then they
Yeah,
removed it." And she started a thread about it, and piles of people have added their requests there, but it hasn't been put back. What can you do, Mr. Tim Gray?
I'll put my hat to put my hat in the ring. Is that the right phrase?
Yeah, yeah.
I'll try to bring that up. Yeah, there's so many of these features, and I often say, I want to meet the person who decided that this feature, the share button, or various other features over the years, who thought they should be removed. I like these features, or that change keyboard shortcuts and things like this. It drives me absolutely bonkers. Sometimes I feel like, and it's not just Adobe. In fairness, as much as I give Adobe a hard time, software companies in general, it feels like to me that they have a tendency to feel like they need to make changes for the sake of change, so people can see there's a list of new features. Just give me, especially now in the subscription model, just give me the new features that are helpful and don't take anything away.
It's like my Thanksgiving menu. You can add, you cannot take away. All right.
Exactly.
So let's see, here we go. Okay. Dave Evans, our friend from Ontario.
Hamilton, Ontario, Canada.
Yeah. He says, "I have 3,294 posts from Tim on my Gmail account." How does that make you feel?
That's that's a lot. And I'm
That's
trying
a
to think
lot.
now how many. This year I didn't tally up. So in fact, I'll bring up on the screen here, because this yesterday, November 1st, marked 21 years, as I mentioned at the start, of my daily Ask Tim Gray email newsletter. And I used to go back and tally up, maybe David can tell me from last year, but I used to tally up how many there had been. I neglected to do that this year, but I'm feeling like he might have most of them, because in the early years, they were a little fewer and farther between, before it became a consistent every, other than holidays, every Monday through Friday. But we did put together a few specials. So for those of you that have had fun with me this evening and might be interested in some of the other things that we've got going on, a couple of things. So if you go to timgray.me, I know yet another domain name, but this is just a shortcut that'll take you to a longer address. But timgray.me/ATG, as in Ask Tim Gray, 21, as in it's been 21 years since I started publishing the Ask Tim Gray email newsletter. And there's a few specials there. I've got a new course you might be interested in that's available for half price. More importantly, perhaps, I have an ebook that I actually wrote last year to honor the 20th anniversary. But on the page, and it's linked from this page, but on the page for that ebook, there's a coupon code you can use if you want to get it for free. And so you can check that out as well. And, just check out the website, timgrayphoto.com. In fact, I'll put that last slide up. first off, just say thank you. Well, thank you, Linda, for having me, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening and for checking it out and contributing to the fun and the happiness. But my primary website, timgrayphoto.com, is a good jumping off point to find essentially everything that I actually do. The Ask Tim Gray email newsletter, the graylearning.com website where I publish a variety of video training courses and various online workshops and photo workshops and speaking at events. I tend to be pretty busy. I have a hard time sometimes keeping track of it all, but fortunately, it's all on the web, easy to track down.
Thank you, Tim. I'm going to get you to take down your screen so I can properly thank you for coming and talking to a room of my friends that get together every Wednesday. And I know that you're busy, and I don't know why you said yes, but this a wonderful presentation for me to add to my Happiness Hour project. There are a lot of new faces in this room, and I hope that they come back and join us every Wednesday. Guys, you can connect with Tim through his website, Tim Gray, Grey, photo.com, and you can find him on YouTube at Tim Gray TV. Next week, Jen Strongen will be here to talk about the intersection of art and science, photographing marine life from above the surface. So until next time, go out and create something beautiful, and I hope that we see you again soon.